Hello and welcome back to Karma Stories. I'm Rob and I hope you are having a wonderful day today. Today I have a bunch of short stories for you from the Tales from Tech Support subreddit. Before we start today, make sure to follow us on your preferred podcasting platform, or if you're on YouTube, drop a like on the video down below because it really does help us out. Alright, on to today's stories. Let's get our nerd on. This story comes to us from Existing Matter 2134. The case of the 7 p.m. Wi-Fi disappearance. Had a ticket from a user who insisted their Wi-Fi kept disappearing every night at exactly 7 p.m. They weren't exaggerating either, it was like clockwork. I checked the router logs, reviewed configs, even monitored their connection remotely. Everything looked totally fine. After a few days of chasing ghosts, I finally asked them to walk me through what was happening at 7 p.m. That's when I noticed something strange. The Wi-Fi SSID they were connecting to wasn't even their own. Turns out their neighbor had the same ISP and the same default router name. Every night at 7, the neighbor would unplug their router so they could use the outlet for their microwave. So my user's Wi-Fi would vanish like magic. The best part? They never realized they'd been freeloading off the neighbor's network the entire time. Once I set up their own router properly, the 7 p.m. mystery outage was solved for good. The one takeaway from this story that I'm getting is that the neighbor was really on schedule for their dinner every day. I mean, they're unplugging this thing at 7 p.m. sharp every single day. Enough times that it made OP put in a tech support ticket. That is amazing. One more thing I'm not getting on this one is that I thought every modem/router that came from an ISP would have a unique SSID for that particular router. But I guess not. Maybe there's a default for some company that is all the same, but that would be kinda dumb. This story comes to us from WanderDive, 7 p.m. network outage. Yesterday, I read the post about the 7 p.m. Wi-Fi disappearance, and it reminded me of this one. It didn't technically happen to me in person, but it was my team and my boss at the time. This was maybe some 20 years ago. I was working IT support for an oil field service company and was taking care of a large operational site along with 5 remote ones. One of the remote sites was a training center, and they started to have a weird issue. Exactly at 7 p.m., like clockwork, part of the building loses connectivity. We tried looking for any issues remotely, but couldn't find anything wrong. Only that the distribution switch for that part of the building is unreachable. So finally, my boss visits the location, and at 7 p.m., poof! He does the troubleshooting, and both the core switch and the distribution switch are up, but no communication between them. Other distribution switches are connected with no issue. The next day, he started to observe anything and everything that happens on the site at 7 p.m. One of the things he noticed was that this was when it starts to get dark, and the security person starts making his rounds, and turning on all the huge stadium-like lights for the site. And this is the exact moment the connectivity is disrupted. Turns out they just installed new lights, and the lazy, money-saving contractor extended the high-power cable through the network ducts that housed the Ethernet cables, later upgraded to fiber optic, connecting the switches instead of laying new ducts. Once he had the cables separated, everything worked perfectly as before. Mystery solved. I would hope that in a story like this, the contractor would be the one who would have to come back out, rerun those cables, and just eat the cost themselves for it because they made the mistake in the first place. But I guess that would depend on what was in their contract and what guidance they were given at the beginning when they first started the job. This story comes to us from Finn Storm, network outage in the mornings. The last 2 posts reminded me of a continuous network outage we had at one of our customer sites. It initially wasn't my problem, but decided to help out because of its stubbornness. Customer comes in after like 2 weeks because why would you want to speed things up, and says their CNC machines lose internet in the morning, from startup until anywhere from 15 minutes to 5 hours later. No other devices had this issue either. Colleague didn't trust the small desktop grade switch it had and replaced it with a new one, but this didn't solve the issue. We discussed with the vendor for a while, but they don't want to come on site to troubleshoot with us and they can't remote in while the problem is occurring. At this point, I step in, having trusted that my colleague has done the basic troubleshooting steps, which will come back to bite us later. Perhaps the internal NIC of the machine is defective, so we use a USB NIC adapter unsuccessfully. I also set up an iPerf ping plotter kit and come across some weird values. The network will come back online for 6 seconds every minute like clockwork, but this isn't enough for Windows or the application to realize the internet is back up and running. Okay, so something is definitely going on with the network. I rack my memories and recall we had an external contractor call us 2 months before if we had an issue with one of our APs at this site. The answer was yes. So I called them up and asked what they did that day. After a lot of back and forth, I learned that we had contracted them to install a switch and 2 APs in or near a conference room. Now, normally this isn't a problem, you'd say, right? Wrong. Every day, this company turned off the main breaker to the production machines, and because the contractor pulled a cable from one of the CNC machine switches instead of the core switches, it would cause the newly installed switch and APs to lose internet connectivity and establish a new one via mesh. The switches and APs we have are not smart enough to release a mesh connection if a wired connection appears again, so this would make a loop. Disabling mesh instantly fixed the issue, even though it caused a network disruption late in the day for the conference room. Hours spent fishing for red herrings and talking to management, 32-ish. Hours spent actually fixing the issue, 0.5. Hours spent trying to talk some common sense in my colleague and myself to check the basics first, infinity plus ongoing. There's a funny coincidence between all 3 of these stories because they are kinda related, that in the comments for them, there's a bunch of people telling their own stories about network equipment going out at very specific times every day. And it turns out a lot of the reasons for that are the cleaning crew plugging in their vacuums, which causes a disturbance and knocks out network equipment. Kind of funny, but there's at least 4 or 5 comments that say the exact same thing. One of the best stories in the comments covers a network connection that goes down at random times throughout the day, and it turns out they had a line of sight connection from one building to another, and it would go out every time a drawbridge opened up in town and blocked the sight lines between the 2 dishes. This story comes to us from Speddy23. Offline means unavailable? What a country! Over Microsoft Teams, other department team's leader, vendor has advised they need to update application and has asked us to take a full backup of the server. All good, I can take a full backup, but this will mean taking the server and hence application offline for up to an hour or so. Let's arrange this for after hours. No, vendor will charge us heavily for after hours. Can we do it at 2 p.m. tomorrow? Sure, I've scheduled it in. Other department's leader says thanks. The next day, 1:30 p.m. Hello, just a reminder I'm shutting down server to take a backup of application at 2 p.m. so vendor can update it. Please ensure you are out of application by this time. Radio silence. 1:55 p.m. Hello, just a reminder I'm shutting down server to take a backup of application at 2 p.m. so vendor can update it. Please ensure you are out of application by this time. Radio silence. 2 p.m. I shut down the server and start taking a full backup. 2:01 p.m. Other department's team leader says, hello, application's not working. Please look at this urgently as we cannot work. As you requested yesterday, I've taken it offline so I can back it up. Why didn't you tell me it would be unavailable? If you told me this, I could plan accordingly. I was doubting myself if I made it that clear. 1 second. Screenshot of yesterday's conversation, specifically around this will mean taking the server and hence application offline for up to an hour or so part. Other department's team leader says, I'm not good with computers. I didn't know that offline means that application would stop working. OP, I think I've determined what the problem is in this case. I think you should have drawn a picture in crayon and sent it to this guy so he would understand it better. I love how OP sent enough warnings to these people that they should have known what was going on, and if they didn't understand what was going on, they would have an opportunity to contact OP to get some clarification. But it doesn't sound like this team lead is the kind of person that's firing on all cylinders, if you know what I mean. This story comes to us from FuzzyAd7691. 90% of my job is reading on-screen prompts for people because they saw words and gave up. Kid brings me his laptop saying he's trying to launch a program, but a pop-up keeps blocking it. I take a look. The pop-up says, "This program cannot launch while other program is running. Close other program and try again." I ask Kid, "What happened when you tried that?" He gets embarrassed and says, "Oh, I didn't." So I have him close the other program and try again. Magically, the problem goes away. A woman comes over and says she's trying to log into a desktop, but it's not working. I walk over and take a look, having her type in her username and password. She does so, and a pop-up says, "Password must be changed. Click continue to change password." She says, "See, this keeps happening. I don't know what to do." I say, as politely as I can, "Well, see here, it says to change your password. So let's do that." I click continue for her. Box 1, enter new password. Box 2, confirm new password. She is confused by the two boxes. What do I do? I had to point to each sentence before she would read them. A girl comes over and says the printer won't release her job. I walk over to look at it. She enters her password and the queue opens, displaying her print job. Then she stands there. "See, it won't do anything." I click the button that says print. Her job releases. She is embarrassed. Please just read. Please read things on your screen before freaking out. Aren't these a couple of the main reasons why people call to tech support? It's because, number 1, people don't read, and number 2, everybody lies. The examples that OP gave in this one are absolutely basic, and if people would just look at the screen and think about what it's actually telling you to do, they'd be able to solve their own problems. And when I say that everybody lies, that one person who tells you, "Yeah, I already rebooted everything," and then you look at their uptime and it's like 130 days, yeah, sure, you rebooted everything, dumbass. This story comes to us from I'm Afraid of Americans. I can't get the PC you prepared for me for free to work. This isn't mine, I'm not an IT guy, but my good friend is. We carpooled for years and remain friends to this day, and he tells me lots of his tales of tech support and how infuriating it can be, and how he sometimes hates people in general. Recently, a common acquaintance was shopping around for a new laptop, and I told her to ask my IT friend, who she also knew, as he's great at indicating the kind of machine they need, and that usually saves them money. Our common acquaintance went a step further and asked him to buy it for her and install Windows and Office and set it up for her. After having done that, for free it should be said, he got an angry phone call from her saying that the webcam wasn't working, and how she had specifically told him to check the webcam, and all sorts of complaints about his work. I can only imagine he sighed, or took a deep breath, and counted to 10, because he didn't tell her to go F herself or hang up, but diagnosed the problem. She said the screen was black, but she could hear sound. He said, "Remove the webcam cover." And I understand perfectly well why sometimes he hates people. And this is the reason why we don't do tech support for friends or family, because you are the one responsible. Even when something completely unrelated happens on that system, well, you're the one that touched it, so you must have caused that problem as well. Yeah, don't do tech support for friends or family. It just winds up in more problems. I also want to point out here that OP said common acquaintance and not friend. Listen, if a common acquaintance calls me up and says, "Hey, go buy this computer for me and then install Windows and Office and get it all set up for me so that it's working for free," I'd be like, what? Go pound sand. This story comes to us from Speddy23, the ticket that just would not close. Way back at an MSP I used to work for, we were offboarding a client for another MSP and had a ticket logged with the other MSP using their general helpdesk@MSP email address. It seemed they had this logged in a similar fashion on their end. Both us and the other MSP used similar ticketing systems. When you closed a ticket, it would send a closure notification to the email address used to log the ticket. This email had the wording of, "If you feel this is not completed, please reply to this email." And if this email was replied to, it would automatically reopen the ticket. The job was complete, and we marked the ticket as complete on our side, which sent the closure notification to the other MSP. The other MSP closed the ticket on their side, which sent a closure notification to us. This closure notification then triggered that the email had been replied to on our side, which reopened the ticket. We then just reclosed it as already complete. This then sent a closure notification from us to the other MSP, which reopened the ticket on their side. This went back and forth a few times until one of us, I think them, manually changed the email address in the ticket so we could both finally close the tickets on each of our sides. I think most ticketing systems these days are programmed to look for things like this and automatically cancel them out, but I remember back in the early days of email when people were setting up autoresponders and they would get into a loop of responding to each other. So-and-so's out of the office. Please try again on such and such date, which would go out to a complete group of people, and then inevitably there'd be a couple more people in that group with autoresponders that would send one back out to the whole group, and it would just go back and forth over and over and over again. This is why I never joined any email lists back in those days. This story comes to us from Passionate196. Apparently being a mind reader is a requirement of tech support. Hello all, I work in tech support for a pretty big company. We're tech support for the employees, not the customer, so one would think the callers would have more basic knowledge. Anywho, this past week I got a call and started with my normal script, which includes asking for an identification number. I barely got my greeting out of my mouth before I was cut off by an irate employee because she had been transferred to me from one of our contractor teams. In this company, we have calls for certain issues outsourced to other teams as they are easier issues to fix. The contractors are not trained in the more time-consuming, intricate issues as they're just meant to lessen our call load for these simple issues. Unfortunately, when we have a call queue, callers will hang up and call another line, hoping to get their issue resolved faster. This leads to calls being transferred as usually they switch to the line for our contractors. That is what happened with, let's call her Susan. I answered and barely got my greeting out before she was irate and yelling over the phone. I listened and politely asked, "Ma'am, may I please have your ID number?" 3 times before she huffed and stated, "She doesn't even know what's going on." To be honest, my patience was wearing thin at this point, so in a firm tone, I stated, "Ma'am, I don't even know who you are." Susan indeed did not like this and started going off again. I eventually was able to get her ID number after about 5 minutes of her being irate. I looked at the ticket for the call she was transferred from and couldn't gain any good insight into the issue from it. I am dead serious when I say I listened to Susan being irate and stating how stupid we are for the entirety of the 15-minute call. I maybe was able to get 2 minutes of talking time. Eventually, she got annoyed and hung up, and I was left thinking about my life choices. So, moral of the story, tech support agents are supposed to be all-knowing beings. Who would have thought? OP added a quick edit at the end. It says, edit, yes, I did report the call, and yes, my supervisor handled it by sending it up the line. I worked in many call centers over my years, and the one customer that really pissed me off the most on a regular basis was the one who would be obviously not happy, but would work with you to get things done. And then when their issue was finally resolved and they saw that things were working, they didn't say another word. They just hung up the phone. No thank you, no nothing, no closure, just hung up because they got what they wanted. Who cares about you, right? This story comes to us from I invented the iPod. When have you tried turning it on doesn't work. It's the early 90s and I'm doing field service work for a company that makes factory automation machines and software for manufacturing companies. We get a call from a customer and their production line is down because your software won't start up. We used a hardware copy protection system for our software, which used a dongle plugged into the printer port. The software would not find the dongle if the printer was attached, but turned off. So that's what the message in red text on a black background with a flashing border around it says. Software licensing key not found. Check that printer is turned on. So I asked the guy, have you checked that the printer is turned on? Of course I have. What kind of idiot do you think I am? You need to send someone down here now. Okay, well, that someone is me. So I load up the company van with a new software key, a new computer, a copy of their custom version of the software, a new printer, every possible cable, all of the tools, and I get on the road. 2 hours later, I rock up to the factory, get checked in, issued earplugs, escorted through a maze of passages and dangerous machinery, and meet the machine operator. I point to the message on the screen, open up the printer cabinet, turn on the printer, point at the green power light, and restart the software, which works fine. Operator gives me a comical oops pantomime, then a thumbs up. Back out through the maze of passages, get to the van, and realize that I've locked the keys in it. So 2 more hours waiting for a coworker to run the spare keys down to me. Now, just so everybody knows, OP did comment a couple times below this one and mentioned that they were charged for travel time, the minimum 1 hour call out time, and it came to several $100s. But if you think about it, it actually cost them a lot more than that because of all the downtime they had in the factory where they couldn't produce their product. So they were out multiple thousands of dollars because somebody couldn't check if the printer was turned on. Alright, let me know your tech support story in the comments down below. If you enjoyed this episode, make sure to follow us on your preferred podcasting platform. If you're on Spotify, please give us a 5-star rating. It really does help us out. I thank everybody for watching and listening. I hope you have a wonderful day, and we'll see you tomorrow.